Hikers and campers of Reddit, what's the creepiest thing you've experienced out in the wild? Yesterday, I was hiking in New Hampshire with a group, and as we were descending the trail, we passed a family with a dog. We were in the flow, so we just kept walking while they stood off to the side. But as we passed, I noticed something strange. The family seemed to be holding hands around the dog, like a little prayer circle. I even heard the man, presumably the father, say, "Lord, please, do not let this dog kill again." I honestly have no idea what was going on with that dog. I stumbled across a dead man hanging from a tree while hiking in a Korean national park, and it absolutely terrified me and the two guys I was with. We were climbing a steep hill, looking for a landmark, when we rounded a bush and practically walked right into him. I immediately sent the other two back down the hill and called the duty desk at the nearby post. Standing up there on the hill, looking out at what must have been the last view he saw, left me with an overwhelming sense of loneliness and unease. Before the DNR admitted they were releasing cougars in the state to control the deer population, my family and I had a terrifying encounter while fishing. Me, my husband, our 6-year-old, and 3-year-old. We kept hearing rustling behind us about 20 yards away. I told my husband I thought I heard a low growl, but of course he didn't hear it, so I figured it was just my imagination. Fast forward an hour, as we were packing up to leave, he finally heard it, a deep growl. He looked at me, terrified, because it was close, and we were still a good quarter-mile from the car. I quickly figured out how to fit both kids into a single stroller and positioned myself closer to the river while my husband stayed between us and the woods. Both of us were completely terrified, while the kids thought it was hilarious to ride together. We finally got everyone into the car and flipped on the headlights before starting the engine, only to see a cougar turn and sprint back into the woods. Not creepy in hindsight, but at the time it absolutely terrified me. I was camping alone in the Valley of the Gods in Utah. I didn't know the area at all. I'd left Mesa Verde later than planned, and by the time I reached my intended campsite, the gate to the access road was locked. The sun had already set. I drove around hoping to find a cell signal to locate another campsite, but there was nothing. After miles without a single crossroad, I spotted a gap in the guardrail and a dirt road leading into the scrub. I said screw it, and drove about half a mile before pulling into what looked like a campsite. I had no idea where I was, but I had no other options, so I set up my one-person tent for the first time ever, using only my headlights and headlamp. By the time I finished, it was 11 p.m. and I was completely exhausted. I passed out quickly, but sometime later I woke up, still disoriented and unsure where I was. That's when I heard it. CRTCH, CRTCH, CRTCH. Coming closer to the tent. CRTCH, CRTCH, CRTCH. Closer. CRTCH, CRTCH. It got to within a foot of my face, and I was too terrified to peek over the vinyl of the tent. I decided to turn on my headlamp hanging from the tent center. Lying on my back, I reached up and flicked it on and froze. Not even a foot from my hand, framed by the mesh window of the tent, was the most terrified-looking sheep face I've ever seen. We stared at each other for what felt like a minute. The light clearly scared her, so I reluctantly turned it off and stayed frozen in silence for another 5 minutes until I heard her walk away. CRTCH, CRTCH, CRTCH. The next morning, I discovered hoof prints all around my tent and car. About 14 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now my wife, in the North Georgia mountains, just off the Appalachian Trail. We set up roughly 100 yards from a fire road, which we'd driven up in my truck. I had firewood in the bed of the truck, but decided not to carry it to the campsite. Just before dark, I noticed the pile seemed smaller than I remembered, but I didn't think much of it since we were a 45-minute drive from anywhere, and I was pretty sure no one else was nearby. Around midnight, I decided to grab a few more pieces of wood. My wife didn't like being alone in the woods, so she walked with me. There was no moon that night, so I took a flashlight and my gun. She asked more than once if the gun was really necessary. When we got to the truck, we heard rustling about 20 feet away on the fire road. I shone the flashlight in that direction and saw a middle-aged man and two teenage boys. They were filthy, wearing tattered clothes, definitely not hikers. Think Deliverance vibes. The man called out, "Y'all got any sticks?" I told them no, grabbed the last couple pieces of wood, and headed back to our campsite. Within earshot, I said to my wife, "That's why I brought a gun." We never saw or heard them again. When I was 19, I went camping with my boyfriend in the wilds of northern Scotland, not at a designated campsite, just deep in the wilderness. Other than the midges, we hadn't seen a single living thing for nearly a full day. We spent the evening drinking, stargazing, and just enjoying the night under the canopy of nature. My boyfriend, being a lightweight, fell asleep before me. I stayed up in the tent, reading by torchlight. Then, suddenly, the roof of the tent started bowing inwards, like 2 to 3 feet. I had to lie down to avoid it touching me. Even though I'd had a fair bit of rum, I swear I saw 10 points pressing down right above my face, as if someone was pushing it with their hands. Fueled by fear and rum, and being a certified scouser, I grabbed my torch and knife and stormed outside in full "let's be having you" mode, but there was no one there. I was terrified for the rest of the night. About 20 years ago, my Boy Scout troop and I saw something really strange in the sky. We were camping out in Texas, deep in the middle of nowhere, far from any city lights. I don't remember the exact location. That night, we were all sleeping outside in sleeping bags on cots, arranged head to toe, so everyone was facing the same direction. We divided the sky into sections like top left, top middle, etc., and started watching for satellites. After a while, having spotted a couple of satellites, we noticed 3 lights moving toward each other. They weren't any brighter than the satellites, but they were moving in directions completely different from the satellites. We were stunned, especially when the 3 lights came to a stop, hovering just about half a finger width apart if you held your finger up to the sky. Then, all at once, they shot off in the directions they came from, moving far faster than they had initially. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen. A group of friends and I were camping in a super remote area in southern Brazil, near the Argentina border. We were by a small pond surrounded by maybe 4 to 5 little vacation houses, mostly empty and only used occasionally. There was zero cell phone signal anywhere. We spent the day swimming, grilling, and just hanging out. Most of the group had gone to sleep, but I was still awake when I saw a flashlight bobbing through the trees about 100 meters away. At first, I assumed it was someone heading to another camp that had arrived early. It must have been around 3 a.m. Then I heard yelling. It was a panicked, frantic shout in a language I didn't understand. Some of the locals speak German, so it sounded vaguely like broken English or German, but it didn't make sense. I woke up my friend who actually speaks German, and he tried responding, but got no intelligible reply. He guessed maybe it was Dutch. I shouted in English too, and that didn't get a reaction either. Then the flashlight swung toward our camp, paused for maybe 10 seconds, and went dark. We could hear someone running quickly through the woods. None of us managed to get back to sleep after that. It was just wrong. The next day we walked around the pond and asked the other camps if anyone had seen or heard anything. Nobody had a clue, though some admitted they had noticed the yelling and flashlight and just assumed it was us being drunk. This area is extremely isolated. There's really no way someone could be there by accident. Even now, years later, it's one of my biggest WTF moments. I still wonder if it was a lost tourist, and if they might still be lost out in the Brazilian bush. I was backpacking solo in Harriman State Park, New York, staying in a one-person tent. Of course, at 2 a.m., I woke up and couldn't get back to sleep. I put on my headlamp and started reading my book, trying to calm down. Then I heard rustling outside my tent. Slowly, I unzipped the flap to peek outside and saw at least 6 porcupines wandering around. I hadn't left any food out, and yet there they were. The weird part, they didn't even seem to care that I was shining my light on them. Just porcupines, doing their thing, completely unbothered by my presence. About a year and a half ago, I had a strange experience hiking in Colorado. My friend and I were making our way up a steep ridgeline when he suddenly grabbed my arm and put a finger to his lips, silent, urgent. I followed his gaze to the left of the trail, about 50 yards away, and froze. There, standing in the underbrush, was a large white wolf. We didn't move for what felt like 5 minutes, just watching as it slowly turned and walked away in the opposite direction, disappearing into the trees. It's probably worth mentioning that the night before, we'd slept in the car at the trailhead. The windows were down, and we heard strange noises, rustling and low growls from somewhere nearby. It unnerved me a bit, but nothing compared to seeing that wolf in broad daylight on the trail. Not exactly creepy, but the whole encounter was surreal, unexpected and unsettling for what was supposed to be a normal hike and camping trip. I was camping near Nederland, Colorado, when this guy suddenly emerged from the woods wearing a beekeeper's hood and carrying a massive knife. It was near dusk, and he casually walked right between our tents and our fire. Our campsite was completely dispersed, not a formal campground, then disappeared back into the trees on the other side. I'm pretty sure his only goal was to scare the hell out of people, and he absolutely succeeded. Let's just say I'm very glad I packed a change of underwear that day. He got lucky we weren't packing heat. When I was a kid, my family stayed in a cabin, and I had a little flashlight on the floor as a nightlight. It cast a big circle of light against the wall. At some point, a daddy longlegs crawled across the beam, and suddenly a massive spider-shaped shadow loomed on the wall. Probably not exactly what you'd call paranormal, but man, it freaked me out. I came face to face with a mountain lion on a trail in West Virginia, just about 10 feet away. I had a pistol with me, but it was loaded with snakeshot shells. It would have annoyed the cat at best, done nothing to stop it. We had a tense 5-second stare down before it finally jumped away. And for anyone wondering, they're definitely not extinct in the eastern US, despite what the USDA might want you to believe. I was hiking on a remote trail with my dog when I noticed a man about 100 feet behind us, taking pictures. At first, I thought he was snapping nature shots, but then I caught him pointing the camera directly at me. When I looked at him, he quickly turned away. Something in my gut told me to speed up. My dog kept glancing over her shoulder and growling. A few minutes later, I glanced back. He'd closed the distance to maybe 30 feet. I picked up the pace, trying to reach the end of the trail, but when I looked again, he was only 10 feet behind, still clicking away with his camera. By then I was jogging. Suddenly, my 100-pound German Shepherd stopped dead, turned, and started barking and baring her teeth, something she's never done before. My heart sank. I looked back, and he was just 4 feet away. He must have been jogging to keep up. I could see my car nearby, so I guided my dog to a fence and stood with my back against it, motioning for him to pass. He lingered for a tense moment, clearly nervous, and then finally took off. I haven't hiked alone without my dog since. I went mountain climbing in Connemara, Galway, Ireland. It's completely wilderness out there. I went with 3 friends, and we hiked for about 4 hours to reach the summit. When we got to the top, we noticed something strange. There were a ton of banana peels scattered around, and they looked really fresh. The weird part, we didn't see anyone else around, and I couldn't imagine how anyone else could have gotten there that day. It wasn't exactly creepy, but it was definitely strange. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and ended up between shelters as the sun set, forcing me to hike into the night. I was probably 3 to 4 miles from the next shelter when I started hearing heavy footsteps on the ridge above me, like cinder blocks crushing leaves and sticks. Those footsteps followed me for at least half an hour, though it felt like a lifetime. I never saw what was making the noise, but I'm certain it was a bear. It's funny how the creepiest things aren't always supernatural. Sometimes it's just people. One day, I was hiking on a mountain near the town I lived in, and I ran into a man coming the other way. He was carrying a couple of bags. I nodded and said hello, like you do when you pass someone in the woods. He mumbled something and scurried past. I didn't think much of it at the time, just mentioned to my girlfriend that he seemed like an asshole. We finished our hike, summited the mountain, and started heading back down. That's when things got surreal. Two big vans roared up, and men in full SWAT gear, rifles in hand, jumped out. They sprinted uphill past me, AR-15s at the ready. It turned out the guy I had passed had just robbed a bank in town, and the men who had raced past were the SWAT team heading to apprehend him. I'm an experienced hiker and outdoors person, and I grew up in the mountains of East Tennessee. Beautiful as they are, the woods have a way of turning downright terrifying. This story isn't mine, it's my boyfriend's. When he was a kid, he and his friends rode dirt bikes all over Unaka Mountain, the kind of logging trails and hollers only local kids know. One evening, he was riding alone, at least 5 or 6 miles from home, deep in the national forest where there weren't any houses for miles. Being 13, he hadn't filled his gas tank, classic rookie mistake, and now he was stuck, pushing his bike home as the sun disappeared behind the trees. That's when it started, faint footsteps, keeping pace behind him, 15 or 20 feet away. Every time he stopped and looked back, the sound stopped too. The forest was dense, too dark to see anything through the thick canopy. Terrified, he started moving faster. The footsteps followed. Soon he reached a small clearing, glanced over his shoulder, and froze. Moonlight glinted off 2 eyes staring straight at him from the darkness. Clenching his helmet like a weapon, he bolted, never looking away. Whatever it was, it stayed behind him, following all the way home. My husband and I were on a hunting trip deep in the northern Michigan woods. Dad had dropped us off with the 14-foot trailer and planned to leave us there overnight so we could get an early start and secure hunting spots. The nearest person was 10 miles away, and real civilization with streetlights was 35 miles out. The snow-covered pines towered above us. Everything was silent, and the scenery was gorgeous. We were just laughing and talking when something big hit the roof. In November, in northern Michigan, nothing that big should be roaming around. A bear would be hibernating or starving, and probably very dangerous. We froze mid-sentence as whatever it was ran along the trailer's roof and jumped off into the snow. I may have needed new pants. My husband was already hunting for ammo, and we were both asking each other, what the actual fuck is that? After a few tense moments, curiosity got the better of us. Outside, snow crunching underfoot would make any creature obvious, but we saw nothing, no tracks, no rustling. We circled the trailer in the small clearing, saw only snow, a few trees, and our own footprints, and slowly went back inside. Logic told us either it had vanished, or something we couldn't comprehend had been there. Eventually, we calmed down and went to sleep, guns loaded and within reach. The next morning, stepping outside to inspect again, we heard it, the same sound of something running across the trailer toward us. We spun around, ready to face our attacker, and watched snow tumble from pine branches in a straight line onto the roof. The branches were 40 feet above us, completely invisible at night. What we thought was a terrifying nocturnal predator was just snow falling. We had genuinely imagined a Yeti, Bigfoot, or some mutant deer with a taste for blood, and all it took was a little snow. One night, while camping, I was woken by the eerie hooting of two owls in nearby trees. The calls seemed to move around me. Every few minutes, I could tell they were shifting perches, stalking silently through the darkness. Then came the sound of enormous wings flapping, followed by a shrill, piercing scream that cut through the night. One of the owls had apparently struck a rabbit. Watching, or rather, listening, to them, it became clear they were hunting together, cornering their prey with a deadly, cooperative precision. My husband and I live in northwest Minnesota, and we were camping near the Canadian border. One afternoon, we decided to go for a bike ride along one of the park's trails. We were moving at a good clip when suddenly, a black bear burst out of the woods and onto the path right in front of us. It didn't register immediately, and by the time I slammed on my brakes, we were only about 20 to 25 feet away from it. I'm pretty sure it could hear my heart pounding. The bear froze, looked at us, and for a moment, it seemed just as startled as we were, more of an "oh crap" than a threat. Then it bolted back into the trees. We kept biking, hearts still racing, and every rustle in the bushes after that had us glancing over our shoulders. A friend and I went camping in a remote forest in the southeast. We left later than planned and realized we wouldn't make it to our intended campsite, so we set up under a rocky overhang that would keep the rain off. We built a fire, cooked some chicken, and chatted for a while. My friend went to sleep early, but I'm a night owl, so I stayed up on my side, just relaxing. That's when I noticed something strange pressing against my phone in my pocket. I leaned up to grab it, and that's when I saw it. A gray smudge hovered in the air. My first thought was a trick of the light, maybe moonlight reflecting off aluminum foil onto the rock ceiling. I scanned the area. No foil. No moon. It was raining. Panic hit me in that moment. I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. I scrambled back and yelled for my friend to wake up. The smudge paused, then darted away and vanished, as if it had never existed. It wasn't terrifying because of its shape or size, but because it was completely inexplicable. We wondered if someone had been playing a prank with a flashlight, but there was no one around, and it wasn't even bright enough to be a flashlight. Just a faint gray haze, slightly lighter than the dark rock behind it. I'm a scientist, skeptical and evidence-driven, but I swear I saw something that night. What it was, I'll never know. But it's a memory that still unsettles me to this day. When I was a kid, we used to camp down by this river, not an official campground, just a quiet stretch of land. On the way down, we'd pass an old, rusted school bus where this strange guy lived. He would always tell us the weirdest stories. How lizard people would emerge from the cliff sides inside giant, floating bubbles to visit him, and how some monstrous creature lurked in the river, waiting to eat our toes. As a kid, it absolutely terrified me. Even thinking about it now still gives me chills. We were camping with family, deep in the forest, around 11 o'clock at night. It was pitch black, so dark you couldn't see your own hands without a flashlight. Out of nowhere, my little cousin, only about 3 years old, started crying. When my uncle asked him what was wrong, all he could say was, "Help, guy come." He couldn't even form full sentences yet, which made it all the more terrifying. The fear in that tiny voice echoed through the campsite. Nobody slept well that night. My brother and I were hiking a section of the Appalachian Trail in Virginia last summer and decided to camp a little ways off the trail. That night, we heard a lot of rustling outside our tent, loud enough to make us pause. Normally it's just wildlife, but this sounded bigger, closer. We whispered to each other, assuming it might be a bear, and tried to stay completely still. Then, out of the dark, we heard a voice, low and calm, whisper, "I think there's 2 of them, but I'm not sure." The forest went completely silent. The rustling slowly moved away, but the tension didn't leave us for a long time. I've never gripped a knife so tightly in my life. A friend and I went hiking in an area that's usually pretty busy, but that day we didn't see a single soul. It was January, below freezing, so we didn't think much of it, though we'd hiked in harsher conditions before and still found people. After about 4 miles, we noticed someone running toward us from the trail. They were bundled up so heavily we couldn't make out any features. As they got closer, we finally saw a park ranger patch, and we relaxed a bit. It turned out a local wildlife reserve had some wolves escape, and we had accidentally wandered onto a little-known path that led right into their perimeter. The ranger was calm and just told us to keep an eye out for the wolves. Not exactly terrifying, but definitely unexpected, and kind of thrilling to think we'd been hiking in the same area as wolves. One time I was hiking around my own yard, perks of living in a small town, and I stepped into a patch of mud that acted almost like quicksand. For a good 5 minutes, I struggled to free myself, genuinely scared for my life, and then spent another minute or 2 digging my shoes out of the muck. To make matters worse, I was about a mile from home, so I had to slog the whole way back with mud up to my knees and soaked through shoes. It was a humbling, messy experience, and luckily, I've never gotten stuck like that again. I grew up in a rural area, surrounded by plenty of undeveloped land. Near one of the dead-end streets, there were some ATV trails, and my friend and I used to go hiking and exploring there. One day, a few miles down the trail, I noticed a flash of bright pink off in the woods. Curious, I wandered closer, and that's when I realized what it was, a little girl's stroller. What made it truly unsettling was how it was standing upright, as if someone had just placed it there. It was facing away from me, so I cautiously circled around it, half expecting to see a child or something else inside. Thankfully, it was empty. Even so, just seeing it there, alone and out of nowhere in the middle of nowhere, gave me chills. My cousins and I rented a cabin in West Virginia for a few days. Every night, we'd hear nearby farm dogs barking at something in the woods. At first, I assumed it was just coyotes. I've done a lot of hiking in California, and coyotes don't usually bother people in a group. One day, we decided to hike in the woods behind the cabin. We followed a road for a few miles until it ended, then continued up to a hill where the trails zigzagged downward. I suggested we take a shortcut straight down the hill. That's when we split up. My friend Omar and I went down the hill. One cousin stayed at the top to rest, and our other two cousins stuck to the trail. About halfway down, I spotted something white in the leaves. Curious, I went closer and realized it was just a pile of bones, of vertebra and hip bones from a large deer. Omar asked if coyotes could have done it, but as I inspected the neck bones, it was clear they'd been broken. That made a mountain lion a more likely culprit. A few feet further, we found another spine, and then what looked like a fresh kill, maybe a day or two old, still with skin attached. The sun was dropping, we were scattered, and it was obvious we'd wandered into its territory. My cousins tend to panic and try to run, which is a terrible idea in this situation. I told them we should head back before the trail got too muddy and dark. When we got back to the cabin, Omar and I told them what we'd seen. That night, none of them even stepped outside for s'mores. I work with search and rescue in Gunnison County, Colorado. One night, we were out searching for a missing hiker deep inside a designated wilderness area. It was already around 11 p.m., and we had 4 teams of 3 working in the field. Our group stumbled across a beer can, a brand we knew the missing hiker often drank. It was a clue, so we started spiraling out from the spot to try to figure out which direction he had gone. We found a narrow game trail that seemed like a good lead, so we shined our headlamps up the path. About 20 feet ahead, behind a fallen log, we froze. There, watching us, was a mountain lion. We all immediately huddled together, trying everything we could think of to scare it off, shining our lights, yelling, making noise. The lion didn't budge. It just sat there, staring at us with those glowing eyes. No fear. We were miles from the rest of our team, with no weapons, as we aren't allowed to carry any in the field. Our only option was to turn around and get back to the trailhead as fast as we could. I honestly thought we were done for, knowing the cat was likely stalking us every step of the way back. It felt like an eternity until we finally made it back to base camp. The next day, we went out with a much larger group and eventually found the hiker. Thankfully, he was alive. But mountain lions? They're terrifying. Later that year, I was coming down a peak at dusk by myself when I found an old mine shaft. Curious, I decided to check it out. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Tons of bones, fur, and the unmistakable stench of a mountain lion den. That was the most terrified I've ever been, making my way back to my car that night. Ever since, I've learned to never underestimate mountain lions. They're not to be messed with. A few weeks ago, I went backpacking with my buddies for the first time. Honestly, I was pretty freaked out because it was probably the farthest I'd ever been from civilization. But we were having a good time until the last night. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a scream. It sounded human, but it was stretched out and unnatural, almost like a person screaming so low, as loud as they possibly could. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then it happened again, and again. The scream kept echoing through the dark, getting closer, coming right up to my tent. It went on forever, the sound twisting and stretching in the night air until it suddenly stopped. I laid there in the silence, my heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted back to sleep, but it wasn't for long. By the time we woke up, the air was thick with unease. We packed up our gear as fast as possible, barely talking. None of us had any idea what that scream had been, but after reading all those /no-sleep stories about search and rescue guys and weird creatures in the woods, I was half expecting a faceless man or something to come hunting us down. When I got home, I tried to find the sound we'd heard. Turns out, it was just coyotes, those damn calls they make in the night. But, man, I swear, it didn't feel like coyotes. The sound still echoes in my head. Coyotes can be terrifying. About a year ago, I spent 3 months on an outdoor expedition in Arizona. We encountered all sorts of strange things along the way, some quirky, some downright unsettling. From catching a glimpse of the Marfa lights while driving to our canoeing section, to a bizarre encounter with an old Mexican man who tried to trade us hatchets for chocolate, 15 of us, mind you, and even hearing elk calls echoing through the night by our camp. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the strange thing I saw near the end of the trip. Only I saw it, and it still gives me chills. It was nearing the last 2 weeks of our 3-month journey, and we were about to start our individual solo expedition, ISE. We'd started the trip in the Galiuro mountain range as a whole group, but then split into smaller teams of 4. My group was the most experienced, so we gave ourselves the most challenging route, a 25 to 30 mile loop over 3 days, while the others tackled easier 15 to 20 mile sections. The first day was pretty straightforward, no problems. But the second day, things got weird. Around 7 miles into the hike, we started hearing footsteps behind us, but every time we looked around, there was nothing there. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just the wind or our minds playing tricks. As we hiked, we came across an old abandoned cabin, marked on our map. It seemed like a good place to stop, so we dropped our bags and took a break. I needed to pee, so I wandered about 30 feet away from the group toward the cabin. While I was relieving myself, I glanced inside the cabin, and that's when I saw him. A man. At least, I thought it was a man. He was standing still, staring right at me. His figure was strange, almost ethereal, like he was made of smoke or mist. His clothes were old and tattered, a dirty cotton shirt and brown pants, and he had a long, wispy white beard. There was something deeply unsettling about his presence. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and a rush of panic shot through me. My heart pounded, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I finished up as quickly as I could, my breath coming in sharp bursts, and I ran back to my group, trembling. I told them what I saw, but of course, none of them believed me. They laughed it off, made some jokes, but I was absolutely shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, about the way he'd just stood there, staring. Finally, I told them, either go look for yourselves or let's get the hell out of here. That's when they realized I wasn't joking. Now, mind you, I'm not the biggest guy in the group, but I was the one who had no problem handling snakes or any critters that would crawl in a camp. I was usually the calm one. But they saw how freaked out I was, and after a few more moments of hesitation, they agreed to leave. The rest of the day was uneventful, but as night began to fall, the footsteps started again. We all heard them, slow, deliberate steps coming from somewhere in the dark. We couldn't see anyone, but the sound was unmistakable. It put us all on edge. We all kept our knives close, but we didn't say much. Everyone was nervous, eyes darting back and forth, listening to the heavy silence that followed the footsteps. Eventually, we fell asleep, but none of us rested easy. We woke the next morning to silence, the footsteps never returning, but the unease lingered. To this day, I still have nightmares about that man, his pale, wispy figure standing there, watching me. I don't know who or what he was, but I'll never forget the feeling of his gaze. A few years ago, my 3 buddies and I decided to take a camping trip out in the woods, not too far from our hometown. We were all in our late teens, about 19 or 20, and we'd heard rumors about Black Panther sightings in the area. That was more than enough to get us excited: guns, knives, beer, and a chance to be out in the woods where no one else was. We thought it would be an adventure. We walked for miles in the dark, just talking and joking around, trying to stir up any wildlife that might be hiding in the trees. The sounds of the forest were eerie, but we were too busy having fun to be scared. Until we heard it. A sound. A horrible, gut-wrenching sound. It was like the wail of an old woman crying, or maybe screeching. It wasn't close, but it didn't matter. We all froze in place. We had heard about how Black Panthers sounded, and it was unmistakable. The high-pitched, eerie cry of something primal. Then, we heard the coyotes, yipping and howling, like they had something cornered. Whatever it was in some serious pain. That was enough for us. We quickly started heading back to the car, but then the wild card of the group, let's call him Jeff, decides it's not a big deal. He basically dares us to stay, calling us all sorts of names if we bail. At that point, we were already halfway back to the car, but we were still deep enough in the woods that if something did happen, we'd be completely exposed. So, we ended up setting up camp. We pitched a 6-person tent, sat around the fire for a bit, and reluctantly agreed to stay the night. After a while, we all got in the tent and passed out. The fire eventually died down, and everything outside went quiet. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why, but I heard something. I wasn't alone. 2 of the other guys had also woken up, and we all lay there, perfectly still, straining to hear what was going on outside. We didn't say anything at first. Everyone was holding their breath, not wanting to wake each other, not knowing if it was just a deer or something harmless. But then the rustling got louder. Closer. There was something moving around our tent, scratching at it, brushing up against the fabric. I could hear claws scraping against the material. My heart was racing. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then, the zipper started coming down slowly, just enough to make us all go completely still. Through the small gap, we could see the outline of a figure, tall and thin. The 3 of us screamed. Then, out of nowhere, this figure leaped into the tent like a superhero. Bam! Landing right on top of us, swinging and kicking in the dark. It was chaos. We were panicking, beating the crap out of whoever, or whatever, had jumped in on top of us. Adrenaline was coursing through us, and we had no clue what was happening. But then, through the mess of punches and shouting, we realized it was our 4th friend. He had been out to pee, and in the dark, with no flashlight and the fire long extinguished, he couldn't find his way back into the tent. When we screamed, he thought we saw something or someone, so he freaked out and dove into the tent, trying to escape whatever he thought was after him. We all just stared at each other for a moment. And then, we lost it. Laughter poured out of us for the next hour. We couldn't stop. We had been so scared of our friend, of him just trying to get back in the tent after a piss, and we all had the same thought at the same time. We're total idiots. We didn't know which was funnier, the fact that we were terrified of our friend's drunken, panicked jump into the tent, or that we had all been awake at the same time, silently freaking out, not knowing the others were just as scared. We may have been in the woods, but we were definitely out of our element. There's a house on a hill deep in the woods near South Lake Tahoe. I've hiked out there a few times, and every time, I've witnessed something strange. Here's the deal. You stand across from the house, on the opposite side of the hill, and you can see the porch light glowing in the distance. But the moment you start walking toward the house, about half a mile away, you lose sight of the light as the trees block your view. You keep going, and by the time you get close enough to the house, the porch light is completely off. In fact, none of the lights in the house work at all because, as far as anyone can tell, the place has been abandoned for years. What's unsettling is that this happens every single time, with everyone who's gone out there with me. We've even tried testing it, having people stationed on the hill and others at the house to observe. The ones on the hill always see the light, but the people at the house never do. It's like it just disappears the closer you get, no matter what. Of course, there's always a backstory to these places, right? The one that circulates about this house is that years ago, a girl used to sneak her boyfriend into the house after her parents had gone to bed. To let him know when it was safe, she would turn on the porch light. The story goes that one night, there was a fire and the girl died in the blaze. It's said that the porch light still flickers on, but now, it's just a ghostly reminder of the girl who once used it to signal someone she loved, and to warn him, too, when things had gone too far. I was out running through the Australian bush with a mate, and we'd just finished a brutal climb, 600 meters of elevation gain in just 2 kilometers. Some sections were at a 45% gradient, making every step feel like a small victory. We were both huffing and puffing when, suddenly, we heard the distant roar of engines. Out of nowhere, a group of guys on motorbikes appeared, flying down the mountain toward us. These dudes looked like they'd been living in the bush for weeks. Dirty clothes, heavy beards, faces caked in grime. They shot past us at full speed, tearing down this insanely steep incline. I could barely keep my balance going down on foot, let alone on a bike. How the hell were they pulling this off? A few hours later, we retraced our steps on the same path. As we came down the mountain, we noticed tire tracks in the dirt. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to follow them. We tracked those tire marks for nearly a kilometer, but then, nothing. The tracks just stopped. No sign of the bikes. No sign of the riders. It was as if they disappeared into thin air. We stood there in silence, staring at the empty ground, trying to make sense of it. But there was no explanation. The tracks just ended. My family hikes pretty often, but there's one experience that stands out, not for being particularly creepy, but for how ridiculous it ended up being. It was a few years ago, somewhere out in the woods. I can't remember exactly where. I had just watched Silence of the Lambs for the first time, and let's just say my imagination was in overdrive. As we were walking along, I spotted something odd in the distance. There, lying on the ground, was a blanket and an empty bottle of lotion. My heart started racing, and before I could stop myself, my brain went straight to that infamous line from the movie. It puts the lotion on the skin. Being a kid, I immediately freaked out. I started picturing some creepy, hidden figure lurking in the woods, ready to drag me off into the night. I mean, the blanket, the lotion, it all fit too well with the twisted scenarios I'd just seen in the film. I convinced my family to leave the area, but now, looking back, I realize how ridiculous it was. The blanket probably just got left behind by some hikers, and the lotion, well, maybe someone had dry skin. I can laugh about it now, but back then, I was certain we were just a few steps away from a scene straight out of a horror movie. Every year, my stepdad's family holds a reunion camping trip in Northern California. My mom married him when I was 22, and now at 27, I've only been to a few of the reunions. Since moving to Chicago 2 years ago, I've missed the last couple. But the first one I went to after their marriage still stands out. That year, my mom, stepdad, little brother, and I packed up all our camping gear and made the long road trip from Southern California to the campground in Northern California. It was about a 13-hour drive, but we were excited to get there. Our first stop for gas was just outside of Los Angeles, still 11 hours away from our destination. As we were filling up, a creepy guy pumping gas next to us glanced over at our gear and said, "You ought not disturb nature this weekend. It won't be kind to you. The woods don't want you out there." We all brushed it off, thinking it was just some weird, superstitious guy, finished up, and got back on the road. A few hours later, we stopped at a truck stop rest area in the middle of nowhere. The area was part wildlife preserve, with an informational wall about the local animals. My brother and I went to check it out while the rest of the family used the bathrooms. When we walked around to the other side, we found a piece of paper taped to the wall. It read, "Leave nature alone. You've already been warned." My brother and I were instantly creeped out. First, the strange guy at the gas station. Now this? We shared the note with our parents, but they weren't that concerned. They just thought it was some prank, so we continued on to the campgrounds. When we arrived, we got out of the car, stretched our stiff legs, and picked our camping spots. I set my tent a little further into the trees, while my brother stayed closer to the fire pits. The campground had cabins, but I wanted a more rugged experience, so I stuck with the tent. We went to meet the extended family, and everyone was super welcoming. After a day of activities, we headed back to our tents. That's when we noticed something off. My mom and stepdad's tent had been completely deconstructed, and a dead woodpecker was lying in front of it. My brother's tent was untouched, but had somehow ended up in the back of the truck. And my tent? It had been moved to the middle of the campground's archery range. We were all pretty shaken, but we shrugged it off and set our tents back up. I moved mine closer to the rest of the family. We tried to laugh it off, but the weirdness didn't stop there. That night, we heard footsteps outside our tents. It wasn't the usual camp staff doing their rounds. These footsteps were fast, running back and forth. Every time either my stepdad or I checked outside, no one was there. We were all on edge, but we finally fell asleep. The next morning, we spoke to the campground's owner and the rest of the family about the footsteps. They hadn't heard anything strange, and no one knew what to make of it. We figured it was just a prank, but it still didn't make sense that no one had been out there. The second night was quieter. No footsteps, but I heard my little brother reading aloud. That seemed odd because he didn't bring any books. I checked my bag, and both of my books were still there. As I listened more closely, I realized he was reciting something from the informational wall we'd seen at the rest stop, the same exact wording. The next morning, my brother asked me, "Did you hear Mom reading last night?" I was confused and told him, "No, I heard you reading or reciting that stuff from the wall." He looked puzzled and said, "I thought I heard Mom." I could tell he wasn't lying, and it dawned on me that we had heard the same thing at the same time, but he heard our mom's voice, and I heard his. When we went to talk to my mom, she wasn't in her tent. We found her up at the rec room with my stepdad, looking concerned. They showed us a note they'd found. Last warning. They'd also found another dead woodpecker outside their tent, but hadn't cleaned it up, planning to tell the groundskeeper. We packed up and decided to leave. My mom, stepdad, brother, and I were done. We opted to stay in a nearby hotel for the night and leave the next morning. When we returned to the campgrounds the next day for breakfast and to say goodbye to the family, we were in for a shock. We pulled up to the rec room, parked, and ate. When we finished and went to leave, all of our packed gear was missing from the truck. We went back to the original camping site, and everything had been set up exactly where we had camped before. Our truck was parked in front of the rec room, and there was no sign of anyone touching our stuff. But somehow, it had all ended up back at our original spot. When we opened the tents, each of us found a dead woodpecker inside with a note, "Safe travels." The next year, the family reunion was held at a different campground. They'd been going to that spot for 25 years, but after what happened, no one wanted to go back. It wasn't just us. Even the rest of the family was shaken by the experience. The next couple reunions, held at a new location, were fine. No creepy occurrences. But we still talk about it sometimes, wondering what the hell happened. I was chaperoning my little sister's Girl Scout camping trip. It was just the girls, their moms, and in this case, older sisters, no boys allowed. So, imagine our surprise when, around 11 p.m., a man showed up with an axe. He wasn't drunk or stumbling, but something about him just felt off. And he had an axe. That's it. No backpack, no camping gear, nothing that would explain why he had it. He wasn't even wearing proper hiking clothes, just a guy, in the middle of the night, standing in a Girl Scout camp with an axe. We immediately yelled at him to leave, but he didn't budge. He just stood there, staring at us. For what felt like half an hour, we considered calling the police, but at the same time, we didn't want to overreact. After all, it was just a man with an axe, right? But the more we thought about it, the more weird and creepy it felt. He was way too close to a campsite filled with little girls. Then, just like that, he turned around and disappeared into the night. No sign of him, no movement in the trees. He was just gone. It was unsettling to say the least. We told the owner of the campsite about what happened, but when they searched, there was no trace of him anywhere. He never returned, and nothing unusual was found, but we couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something strange. It wasn't exactly a camping trip, but I was outside my cousin's cabin in New Hampshire, just relaxing by the fire. The cabin is really in the middle of nowhere, accessible only by a long, desolate dirt road. There are a few neighbors, but they're spaced out pretty far apart. One night, we were hanging around the bonfire, enjoying the peace, when suddenly, we heard loud opera music drifting through the air. It was coming from the dark woods, in the opposite direction of the nearest cabins. Sure, there were plenty of logical explanations we considered. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, or a couple of kids walking through the woods. Or perhaps the sound was echoing off the lake from further away. But at 1 a.m., with nothing else but the fire crackling around us, it freaked us out. The music was so out of place in the quiet forest, it felt like something off. I was hiking with my girlfriend on a fairly remote trail out in the countryside when we came across a campground area. It was quiet, no campers around, just the stillness of the woods. As we kept walking, we noticed a man standing on the trail up ahead, just barely visible in the distance. Out of nowhere, he suddenly ducked into the woods without any apparent reason. We had no choice but to pass that spot to continue our hike, but neither of us felt comfortable doing so. Without saying much, we both turned around at the same time and decided to leave. Something about the whole situation just didn't sit right. I share this story whenever these kinds of posts come up. A few summers ago, while working as a field biologist, I had an experience that I can only describe as my closest encounter with something paranormal. My team and I would spend nights driving around on ATVs with spotlights, looking for prairie chickens. One night, my boss and I were working together. Our co-workers were about 5 miles away at another site, and we had plans to meet up if either of our groups finished early. Around 4 a.m., it was pitch black, and we both noticed something odd. On a hilltop opposite us, the grass seemed to be illuminated, as if someone had parked their truck there and turned on their brights. The light was coming from the direction where our trucks were parked, so we assumed it was our co-workers coming to meet us. We drove about half a mile to the hilltop, eager to see them. But when we crested the hill, all we saw were the reflectors of our own parked trucks in the distance. No lights, no vehicles, and definitely no one nearby. We were working in a really remote part of Wyoming. The roads were treacherous, and there was no way anyone could have snuck in and out to mess with us without us noticing. The prairie stretched for miles, and we could see everything around us. Yet, that light we saw just vanished. It was weird. This isn't my own story, but it's one my dad told me. He was camping with a friend in a tent when, in the middle of the night, they woke up to the sound of hissing and scratching on the tent. They decided to check it out and were shocked to see hundreds of raccoons surrounding them, all trying to get in. The worst part? The only thing they could see in the dark were the glowing eyes of the raccoons all around them. So, with no other choice, they grabbed brooms and fought them off, hoping to scare them away. I'm not sure creepy is the right word, but one time I was walking down to a lake and realized there was a bear just hanging out by the water. We locked eyes, and it felt like an eternity. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to break the stare, pretending like I was just casually looking around the lake. Then, I slowly turned my back and started walking away, desperately trying not to look like a snack. All I could think was, do not look like food. This didn't happen while hiking, but when I was a kid living on a farm in Europe. It was the middle of the day, and my grandparents told me to stay inside because something was outside. I peered through the kitchen window and saw this incredibly tall, unnaturally skinny, black dog-like creature walking past our barn, about 80 feet away from the house. What stood out most was how slowly it moved, like it wasn't scared or bothered by anything around it. That moment has always stuck with me. I don't remember if they explained what it was or where it went after, but I've never forgotten how strange and unsettling it was. This was near Ziežmariai in Lithuania. I grew up near Aspen, Colorado, and the hiking during the off-season was unbeatable. When I was 17, my girlfriend, now my fiancée, and I decided to escape for a week in the mountains. We took a remote hiking route, around 180 miles, and while it was known to be challenging, it wasn't a typical path, so we didn't expect to run into anyone. I wasn't exactly the most active kid, but my parents were supportive and trusted us. I'd also known and gotten along well with my girlfriend's mom, so off we went into the woods. The trails weren't well maintained, and as expected, it was quiet. The first surprise came just an hour in. There was an older man with his young daughter on the same path. They were moving much slower than us, so we passed by, exchanging a casual hello. But the man immediately greeted us back with a cheerful enthusiasm that felt off. He smiled and started asking about our route, our ages, and what brought us out there. I wanted nothing more than to continue on, but I didn't want to be rude, so I answered. The conversation kept going, and before long, it became clear that he was more interested in us than I was comfortable with. When I politely turned down an invitation to join him and his daughter, his demeanor shifted. He suddenly got serious, his tone firm, and told us that we needed to help them because they didn't have a tent. That's when I realized his day pack was tiny. There was no way it could fit a tent or any proper camping gear. My girlfriend shot me a look, one that clearly said, "We need to leave now." I gave her a nod, but before we could turn away, the man squeezed my shoulder. His voice softened, but there was an edge to it. "Please. You seem like a nice pair. You have big packs. Please help me and my daughter." I was already feeling uneasy, but I told him again, kindly, that we couldn't help. As I looked him over again, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a noticeable bulge under his plaid shirt that looked like the shape of a gun. I pulled my girlfriend's shoulder and guided her away, saying a quick goodbye. But as we started walking, the man picked up his pace, staying just a little too close behind us, about 200 feet. I let it go for a while, but after 20 minutes or so, I stopped dead in my tracks. My hand gripped the handle of the kukri machete I'd brought for bushwhacking. When he caught up, I asked his daughter, "So, how are you guys planning on sleeping tonight?" She looked a little younger than me, and while she seemed fine, it struck me how quiet she'd been the whole time. "We had a plan," she said softly. "But I'm not sure my dad knows what he's doing. Seems like he's not sure, either." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The man laughed and threw his arm around her shoulder. Then he said something strange, "We rely on others." That made my stomach twist. I gave him a questioning look and said, "You seem like a nice guy, but we're only packed for two, and I'm sticking to that." It was clear he understood that I was putting up a boundary. The weird part, that was the end of it. He didn't push further or argue, but the whole situation left a bad taste in my mouth. We carried on without another word between us, but the whole encounter was unsettling. I've heard stories from the Appalachian Trail, but it's the first time something like that has happened to me. It was the kind of experience that made you question what kind of people wander out there, and whether you're ever truly alone in the wilderness. When I was about 12, one of my friends threw a party in his backyard. The plan was simple: hang out, play games, enjoy the meteor shower. It was in August, and then camp out in the tent. He lived in a pretty remote area, surrounded by woods and farmland. It was the perfect setting for a night under the stars. The meteor shower itself was amazing, the sky streaked with light, but once it was over, we all retreated to the tent to settle in for the night. I remember dozing in and out of sleep, the sounds of the night filling the air, wind rustling through trees, crickets chirping, and then other sounds. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but there were faint noises that almost sounded like voices. Low murmurs, whispers, but nothing that made sense. We all felt it, this creeping sensation that something just wasn't right. A couple of the guys ventured outside, shining flashlights, looking around the yard. They couldn't see anything unusual, but when they came back, no one really felt reassured. There was a strange energy in the air, a tension we couldn't shake. Then, at around 3 a.m., something shifted. It was like the whole group woke up at once, not from any sound or noise, but from the sheer feeling of being watched. My friend, who was lying closest to the tent entrance, reached for the flashlight. It flickered on, then immediately went out. Total darkness. The air seemed to close in around us. We didn't need to say anything. We all grabbed our sleeping bags and bolted for the house, not bothering to look back. We didn't care about waking anyone up. Everyone just felt that primal urge to get away. We huddled together in the basement, too freaked out to sleep, too shaken to even talk about what had just happened. To this day, none of us can explain what it was. We didn't see anything, didn't hear anything concrete, but there was something out there that night. Something that terrified all of us without ever revealing itself. My son and I were hiking through Colorado Bend State Park in Texas, enjoying the quiet of the trails, when suddenly, a goat came charging out of the brush behind us, looking absolutely frantic. It bolted past us at full speed, its hooves kicking up dust as it raced through the tall grass. We barely had time to react when we noticed the faint sound of something moving quickly in the grass behind it. We couldn't see it, but whatever was chasing that goat was close, too close. The sound abruptly stopped as soon as the goat passed us. It was unnerving, and I felt my instincts go on high alert. About 30 minutes later, we came across a gruesome sight, a fresh kill. We couldn't tell exactly what had happened, but the carcass was mangled, evidence of a predator's work. My stomach tightened, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We were deep in mountain lion territory, and that feeling of being stalked stayed with us for the next hour. The trees seemed denser, the shadows darker. Every crackle of the underbrush made me flinch. I kept scanning the horizon, but saw nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a more open area, and the tension lifted. We finished our hike on a lighter note, catching glimpses of wildlife. Wild turkeys strutting through the brush, armadillos scurrying across the trail, and a fox darting through the trees. But for that hour, the memory of what we'd felt, and what had chased that goat, hung heavy in the air. One summer, my friends and I at university decided to take some mushrooms and go on a hike into the wilderness. We'd been talking about it for a while, and the idea of getting away from the world for a while sounded like the perfect adventure. The air was crisp, the forest dense, and the trip started out as expected, full of laughter and wide-eyed wonder at the world around us. At one point, we spotted a guy standing alone on a hill near a tree. He was just there, motionless. It was hard to focus on him for too long, especially as the mushrooms began to kick in. The world started to shift, colors bleeding and the trees bending slightly, as if the forest itself was alive. Some of us felt uneasy about the man, and instead of walking past him directly, we decided to sneak around the hill, keeping our distance. It was as if the strange sight of him somehow set off a silent alarm in our heads. We spent a few hours on our trip, letting the mushrooms take us deeper into the woods, but as the sun started to dip and the colors of the day softened, we knew it was time to head back. The hike down the hill felt different now, and the world had started to settle back into its usual rhythm. As we descended, we were startled to see the same man. He was still standing by that same tree, just as we had left him. His posture hadn't shifted in the slightest. It was like time had stopped for him. Some of the braver people in the group wanted to go closer, and against our better judgment, we followed. When we reached him, we stopped cold. What we had thought was a man standing still was actually something far worse. His body was hanging from the tree, lifeless, his feet barely brushing the ground. A rush of dread shot through me. The mushrooms had faded a little, but the disorienting sense of something being wrong was all too real now. We left quickly, our minds racing. It was hard to process what we'd seen, but we waited until we were back in town and sobered up a bit before going to the cops. The officers didn't hesitate. They went to the spot with us, and the look on their faces when they saw the body said it all. At first, we thought it might have been a suicide, but the cops weren't so sure. They thought it looked more like a murder. The rest of the night is a blur, but the image of that man, still and lifeless, haunted us all for weeks. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole thing. Something about the timing of it all, the eerie stillness of the man's position. Like we weren't meant to see him. Or maybe we were never supposed to be there in the first place. A few years ago, my dad and I decided to go hiking and camping at Providence Canyon in South Georgia. It's one of those places with a wild beauty, where the trails wind in and out of dense brush and creek beds. You feel like you're walking through a maze of earthy passageways, where the canyon walls rise high on either side and the forest swallows sound. When we arrived, the park rangers casually mentioned that a mountain lion had been spotted in the area recently. My dad and I shrugged it off, mostly amused by the idea. I mean, this was Georgia, not the Rockies. But we didn't think too much about it. The hike took us south of the main canyon, where the trails got thinner and the landscape felt even more untamed. Primitive campsites dotted the path, tucked away in the trees. When we got to our campsite, there was another father and son already set up nearby, along with their massive, tough-looking German Shepherd. They came over to say hello, and we all agreed to join forces for a campfire later on. As the night fell and the fire crackled, conversation turned to the mountain lion sighting. The dad scoffed and said, "My dog would tear that cat apart." It was hard to take him seriously. His dog was big, sure, but the idea of it taking on a mountain lion seemed far-fetched. A few hours later, the dog's mood suddenly shifted. It started growling low, its body tense, ears flat against its head, eyes darting toward the dark edge of the woods. We couldn't see anything, but we all felt the shift in the air. Without hesitation, the guy grabbed the dog by the scruff of its neck and shoved it out into the dark, beyond the light of the fire. "Go get it, boy," he shouted as if it were no big deal. We all waited, frozen, watching. The dog didn't even make it 3 feet before it let out an ear-piercing screech, the kind of sound you hear when a puppy's hurt. It bolted back toward us at full speed, eyes wide in terror, and dove straight under the nearest tent, not even looking back. None of us said anything. The fire crackled, and the night seemed unnaturally still. The guy stood there for a moment, dumbfounded, then shrugged and said, "Guess that cat's still out there." We all decided to pack it in early, retreating to our tents and staying as quiet as we could. The night was unsettlingly calm after that. No sounds of animals or anything else, but we all felt a presence just beyond the firelight. The next morning, my dad and I ventured out of our tents and noticed fresh tracks around the campsite. Clear as day, mountain lion tracks. Big ones. That's when it hit me. That cat had been so close to us the whole time. We never heard it, never saw it, but it was watching us, sizing us up. I don't think any of us felt safe after that. Cats are hunters, silent, precise, and terrifying. At any moment, that lion could have dropped from the tree line without a sound, and we would have never had a chance to react. Even the tough German shepherd, who had probably faced down wild boars, was no match for it. It was a sobering reminder of how vulnerable we all are in the wild. You think you're in control until something like that reminds you who really runs the show. In the summer of 1976, my family spent a few weeks camping around eastern Canada in our old tent trailer. One night, we found ourselves at a remote campground, tucked far away from any signs of civilization. It was the kind of place where the silence felt heavy, like the trees were holding their breath. That night, as we settled in for sleep, we kept hearing this strange sound coming from just outside the trailer. This eerie, drawn-out, "oh, oh, oh." It sounded almost like people, but not quite. It was too deep, too guttural, like some kind of primal chant, and it echoed through the stillness of the forest. For a moment, it almost felt like someone, or something, was trying to imitate a monkey's call. The noise would rise and fall, coming from all around us, just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. We were terrified. My parents were usually the calm, collected types, but even they couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there in the woods. Every time the noise rose, it sent a chill down our spines. What could it be? An animal? A person? I don't think any of us got much sleep that night. By morning, the strange sounds had stopped, but the tension still lingered in the air. It wasn't until we were packing up to leave that we discovered the source of the noise. A large flock of crows, perched on a line of trees, had been the culprits. They were cawing in unison, and when you're half asleep in the dead of night, it sounds downright otherworldly. Still, knowing the cause didn't ease the creeping feeling it had left behind. There was something unnerving about that wild, unexpected noise echoing through the woods. It was the kind of sound you don't forget, even if it's just a bunch of birds. I grew up in a small, rural town in the south, surrounded by acres of woods and fields. Along the county border, There are two parks that touch the river, and both are rarely visited. The nearest city is more than 40 minutes away, so most people don't bother with the long drive for a hike or camping. That meant the trails were usually quiet, and I could let my dog run free without worrying about other hikers or him running off. He had severe separation anxiety and would just sit and wait for me if he couldn't see me. During the summer, when I was in college, my dog and I spent almost every other day hiking one of those parks. One day, we were near the river, stopping at one of the few designated camping spots. Someone had clearly been there before, but I didn't think much of it. I settled in to read while my dog chewed on a stick, content to lounge in the sun. But then, he got up suddenly, and his body went completely still. He was staring into the tree line, his eyes locked on something. The tree line was about 30 to 40 yards away, and though it was a sunny day, all I could see was overgrown brush. He didn't growl or bark, just stared, unblinking, not moving. It was the first time he'd ever acted like this. I tucked my book away, feeling an unease settle over me. I stood up and started walking down the path, but my dog wouldn't stop looking back, eyes fixed on the same spot. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise as he growled low in his throat. I turned to look, but the path was still empty. I tried to brush it off, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. It wasn't until we were a bit farther down the path that I saw it, a flicker of movement back at the campsite. It was too far to make out clearly, but whatever it was had crossed the path and disappeared into the thick underbrush by the river. I thought it could be a deer or maybe a stray dog, but something in my gut told me it wasn't. This section of the park is the straightest and most well-maintained trail, but it's also the furthest from the main road. There's no easy way to reach it unless you want to swim across the river. As we neared a bend in the path, I stopped and glanced back. I saw movement at the campsite again. Something was there, but now, I couldn't tell if it was human or animal. And then, whatever it was, moved into the trees. I stood frozen, watching my dog. His alert stance mirrored mine. He was still fixated on the same spot, and my unease turned to full-blown anxiety. We both had the feeling that we weren't alone. We hit the bend and started heading toward the road, opting for the shorter, more direct route. The path wouldn't take us back to the campsite, but it did cross another trail that leads to an old barn, another popular camping spot, though one that felt a lot more neglected. The barn had been used by Boy Scouts in the past, and the walls were covered in carvings and old, discarded camping gear. My senses were on high alert as we approached the intersection. I heard something move ahead of us. My dog immediately darted to the intersection and stopped, lifting one paw, an odd, almost unnatural gesture I'd never seen before. He growled low, his body tense. I stepped into the clearing, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The sound stopped, but my dog kept his position, growling. Then I saw him. About 20 feet away, standing on a small mound of earth, was a man. He was staring directly at me, his eyes unblinking. My heart skipped a beat. I kept my grip on my dog's collar, trying to stay calm, but my mind raced. I didn't want to make any sudden movements that might provoke him. "Are you coming from the campsite?" I asked, my voice steady, though my nerves were shot. He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me. I couldn't look away, but neither of us moved for what felt like a long moment. He was wearing a dirty white t-shirt, so filthy it was nearly brown, and his hair and beard were unkempt but well-groomed. His face looked tired, worn out. I kept my dog on the leash, my hand tied around his collar. I tugged softly, signaling for us to leave. "Thanks, but we're heading out," I said as calmly as I could manage. We turned to walk away, but I kept glancing back. He hadn't moved, not a step. There was no sound, no sign of him following. I picked up the pace, my stomach in knots, until my dog and I were finally out of that intersection. Once we hit the main trail, I didn't look back again. We made it to the car quickly, my heart still racing, and I didn't feel safe until we were a good distance away. For weeks after that, I avoided that section of the park. The sight of that man, standing so still, staring at me without a word, stayed with me. It's been years since then, and I still won't go back to that campsite, or even close to it. The woods hold too many secrets, and some things are better left unexplored. It was equal parts terrifying and hilarious. This one experience in upstate New York while road tripping with my, now ex-girlfriend. We were on our way from Michigan to Boston, just driving through the middle of nowhere. We'd originally planned to camp at a spot near a lake, but we had to change our location last minute after discovering that the campsite was right next to a maximum security prison. So, with no real plan B, we ended up deep in the woods, away from everything, with no trails in sight. We managed to get a fire going and were sitting by it, talking, just enjoying the night in isolation. Our car was about a 10-minute hike away through dense woods, so we were completely off the grid. It was peaceful until we heard it. First, it was a distant noise, like an engine sputtering, followed by flashes of light cutting through the trees. The noise got louder, and before we could react, a beat-up junker of a car came barreling through the underbrush, crashing through the woods like something out of a horror movie. It screeched to a halt about 40 feet from our fire, the engine still running. My girlfriend and I froze in terror. This wasn't normal, and we had no idea who or what was approaching. The door creaked open, and out stepped a towering figure, a country bumpkin, if I've ever seen one. No shirt, just jean overalls and a trucker hat. He reached into the trunk, grabbed something, slammed it shut, and started walking toward us. I quickly handed her the car keys and my pocket knife. "Run to the car." "Now," I whispered, my heart pounding. As she backed away, I grabbed my beer bottle by the neck, preparing for the worst. The man walked closer, way too close for comfort. Standing in front of me, he squinted in the firelight and casually asked, "You out here all by yourself?" I don't even remember what I said next. My brain had completely shut down in panic. But we exchanged a few words, and I honestly thought this was it. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, he reached behind his back. My stomach dropped. But instead of pulling out a weapon, he pulled out a 6-pack of beer and a CD in a plain paper sleeve. The album was crudely drawn with pen and highlighter, and it said "Fantastic Fish Tales" on the front. He dropped the beer and the CD onto the camp table, then said, "You and your lady friend have yourself a good night, wherever she's hiding." With that, he turned, walked back to his car, and drove off into the woods as suddenly as he appeared. I stood there for a few moments, completely stunned. The sheer absurdity of it all hit me like a freight train. My girlfriend and I just stared at each other, both of us too shaken to speak. That was the most bizarre encounter I've ever had. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The whole situation stuck in my mind like a bad dream. The CD, however, is a different story. It's awful, really, truly awful, but I can't help but laugh every time I listen to it. It's the kind of music you'd expect to find at the end of a road trip in the middle of nowhere when you think you're about to die. But hey, at least I've got a killer story and a laughably terrible CD to boot. This happened about 7 years ago when I was 16. I was out bear hunting with my dad and brother in the Allegheny National Forest near Tionesta, Pennsylvania. This was an area I knew well. I'd camped there with my family since I was old enough to walk. Because of the familiarity I had with the woods, I was trusted to hunt alone. It was late in the day, just when I'd planned to turn back to camp. There was about 4 inches of snow on the ground, and the sky hinted that more was coming. The light had started to fade beneath the thick canopy of trees, and the quiet of the woods had grown more intense. I hiked along a ridge line, stopping every few minutes to listen and scan the area. And that's when I heard it, a voice, faint at first, but unmistakable. "Dad." It was a small child's voice, barely above a whisper, but it was clear as day. I froze immediately, trying to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. "Dad," the voice cried again. This time it was frantic, desperate. "Dad, help! Help, help, help!" A chill ran through me as my mind raced. At first, I thought maybe the boy had gotten separated from his father, and with the daylight fading, he was scared. But the voice sounded so young, so small. How could a kid be out here all alone? The way his voice cut through the stillness of the snow-covered woods. It was like it sliced the air. My heart started racing, and I felt that immediate gut feeling that something wasn't right. Without thinking, I grabbed my rifle, holding it in one hand as I sprinted toward the sound. My footsteps crunched loudly in the snow as I ran, heart pounding in my chest. I stopped at a clearing, shouting toward the voice, "I'm coming for you. Keep yelling." But the voice didn't change, still just those pleading cries, "Dad, help." I knew the boy must be near the lower side of the main road that cuts through the forest, close to Lamentation Creek. My brother was hunting in that area, and I figured he had to have heard it too. I had to get to him. I slid down the snowy hillside, gaining my balance before making it to the road. I caught my breath there for a moment, listening, still hearing that cry for help, echoing in the distance. I started racing toward the creek, thinking I was getting closer, ready to call out again. But then, nothing. The cries stopped. I stopped in my tracks, confused. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting, listening. But there was nothing. Not even the sound of the wind. Everything felt still, too still. I called out again. "Hello." My voice cracked through the silence, bouncing off the trees and the snow. But the woods were completely still. I waited, straining to hear anything, any movement. No answer. Just the deepening silence. My instincts told me to stop, to leave. But I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were rooted to the spot, my senses heightened beyond anything I had ever felt. The darkness seemed to press in on me, and I was hyper-aware of every single sound, the soft fall of snowflakes, the creak of branches in the cold wind. My eyes darted around, scanning for movement, for something, but there was nothing. I waited, calling out every couple of minutes, still nothing. No response from the boy. No response from any of the other hunters. It was as if the entire world had gone silent. After what felt like an eternity, the voice in my head that had said stop now urged me to leave, and I knew it was time. But I couldn't just turn and walk away, not without knowing what had happened. For another 15 or 20 minutes, I stood there, calling out into the cold void. And all I heard was the snow softly falling, nothing more. When I finally made it back to camp, I asked my dad and brother if they had heard the voice, the child's cries. Neither of them had. They hadn't heard anything. Then I asked if they'd heard me calling, but once again, they hadn't. My voice had carried through those woods, I was sure of it, and yet they hadn't heard a single thing. We talked to some campers who were near the creek, asking if they had a small child with them or if they'd heard anything. They hadn't. No one had any idea where the child could have come from. Looking back now, I don't know what it was that I heard that day. I don't think there was ever a child at all. But I'll never forget that voice. It still gives me chills just thinking about it. That moment in the woods. It was something I can't explain. This happened a bit late, but it's my friend's story. One night, he woke up in the middle of the night, needing to use the bathroom. The campsite was set up near a small creek, so to reach the spot, he had to pass a rickety old bridge that spanned over the water. He made his way to the spot and did his business, everything normal at first. But as he was heading back, he crossed the bridge again, and right there, standing in the dark near the edge, was his friend who'd been sleeping in the tent next to his. They nodded to each other, said a quick, "Hey," as they passed. It wasn't unusual, nothing felt off at that moment. But when he got back to the tent and crawled in to get some sleep, he froze. There, curled up and sound asleep in his sleeping bag, was the same friend, the one he'd just seen standing on the bridge. It took a second for it to register. He sat up, heart racing, but his friend was definitely still there, snoring softly, completely unaware. My friend stayed wide awake the rest of the night, staring at the guy, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The weirdest part? Neither of them had been sleepwalking. They'd both been wide awake at the time. To this day, he still can't explain who or what he saw on that bridge. I've spent a lot of time in the wild, so I've encountered my fair share of bizarre, creepy, and even downright terrifying experiences. Here's a list of some of the most intense moments I've had, ordered by altitude, from sea level to well over 4,000 meters. Finding a dead whale on a beach in Norway. The smell will haunt me forever. The sheer size of the whale, its body bloated and covered in flies, was something I can't erase from my memory. Fighting off a flock of fulmars and whales. These birds aren't your average seagulls. They defend their nests by projectile vomiting on anything that gets too close. I found myself surrounded by the disgusting mess, trying to dodge their relentless attack while perched on a cliff edge. Waking to the sound of breathing and sniffing outside my tent, I was camping alone when I heard it, a deep, rhythmic breath, followed by a sniffing sound just outside the canvas. My heart dropped when I realized I was face to face with a black bear, so close I could hear it moving around. I froze, praying it would go away, and luckily it did. Vipers, so many vipers. I was climbing a route in the Alps when a horned viper leapt over my head, landing a few meters below me and slithering off. As if that wasn't enough, one of them followed us across a near vertical section of the climb for over 40 meters. I've never been so focused on keeping my balance. Finding a dead cat nailed to a tree deep in the forest, I don't know what to make of this. The eerie silence of the woods made it all the more unsettling, as if some malevolent force was at play. Falling 8 meters during a sport route, I was unroped, casually telling my girlfriend what holds to grab on a nearby route when suddenly, the hold I was on broke. I fell straight down, crashing onto the rock below, but somehow walked away with nothing broken. A rock landing on my backpack, missing my head by inches. It was one of those moments when time seems to slow down. I was walking with my pack when a sizable rock tumbled down from above, slamming into my backpack. I never saw it coming. Finding blood on the rocks and a broken helmet with hair still attached, I stumbled across this scene on a route I was climbing, and the sheer violence of it left me speechless. The bloodstains, the broken gear, and the hair, it was as though something had gone horribly wrong just before I arrived. Seeing an avalanche rushing over a frozen waterfall, it was one of those moments where your gut tells you to make a move. We'd been climbing near a waterfall when the avalanche came roaring down. We took the safer route just 10 meters to the right, and by some miracle, we were fine. Witnessing an avalanche that took my mother's life, this one still cuts deep. We were tours skiing in the mountains when my mother, eager to catch the sunrise from the summit, started her descent earlier than the rest of us. I watched in horror as the avalanche swept her away. The only survivor was our Jack Russell Terrier, who had been in her backpack. Climbing all day, then losing a friend in the dark, we were descending late, and after a full day of climbing, we reached a steep section. My friend, tired and a little off balance, stumbled and caught his crampon in his gaiter, falling over the edge of a 40-meter cliff. He didn't survive. Falling into a crevasse, it wasn't just a fall, it was the slow realization that I was no longer on solid ground. I was roped in, but the feeling of falling into that abyss, helpless as I was pulled in, is something I'll never forget. Watching a house-sized serac tumble down the mountain, it was just half an hour earlier that I had been standing on that very patch of snow. The serac, a massive block of ice, came crashing down, and for a second, it felt like the mountain itself was alive. Had I been just a little slower, I wouldn't be here today. I grew up on a mountain in the Pacific Northwest, so I spent most of my childhood exploring the forests around my house, memorizing trails, and getting familiar with the hidden corners of the woods. As I got older, I wanted to share these places with my friends, the secret spots I had discovered as a kid. Some of them were cool because people had built things deep in the forest long ago and just forgotten about them. I knew of a few rope swings, tree forts, and even the ruins of old buildings scattered throughout. One trail in particular caught my attention. I had been trying to find it for over a year. The original entry had long since been overgrown, so it took a while to figure out another way to access it. Once I finally found the new route, my friends and I decided to hike down the mountain and explore. This is where things get strange. As we made our way along the trail, I noticed something unusual deep in the woods, about 200 feet off the path. A small log cabin. It seemed completely out of place, nowhere near any of the trails I'd ever been on. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of it, wondering how I'd missed it all those years of exploring. You can see the view from the main trail in these photos. http://imager.com//.We. We continued down the trail, but I couldn't stop thinking about that cabin. It looked old, probably abandoned for years, but I'd never seen it before, even though I had hiked these trails almost every day as a kid. I went home that night and shared the pictures with my friends. They were just as curious as I was, so I convinced them to go back with me and try to find a way to get to the cabin. A few weeks later, we hiked down the same old trail, 4 of us this time. Since there was no main trail to the cabin, we had to navigate through dense underbrush, climb over logs, and slog through dry creek beds. The terrain on this mountain is steep and uneven, with plenty of gullies that make walking difficult. But after what felt like an eternity, we finally made it. The moment I saw the cabin up close, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. As we got closer, the first thing I noticed were pieces of ripped-up white fabric scattered on the ground. Later, I realized they were remnants of a mattress. The fabric was stained with blood and dirt. That's when my nerves really started to kick in. We approached the cabin cautiously, all of us wondering what we'd find inside. I convinced our guy friends to go first. The cabin itself was tiny, so small that we had to duck to get inside. There was no door, just an open entryway. Inside, we saw empty cans and food containers scattered across the wooden floor, along with torn clothing. There was a small bed in the corner, caked in dirt and looking like it had been used a lot. I only dared to peek inside for a minute before turning around and backing out. But that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Human feces scattered around the base of the cabin and some still fresh. It was too close, just a few feet from the cabin entrance. I don't care how primitive your living situation is. Even people who squat in the woods usually know to bury their waste. This felt wrong, unsettling. I immediately called to the others, urging them to leave. We followed a flatter path back to the main trail, but as we walked, we saw more pieces of the mattress, more feces, and random bits of what I assumed were clothing scattered along the way. When I got home, I decided to do a little research on the cabin. I thought maybe it was an old historical site that squatters had taken over. But the weirdest thing? I couldn't find a single mention of it online. No historical records, no photos, nothing. It was like it didn't exist. I've been tempted to go back and explore more, but part of me is too afraid. I can't shake the feeling that someone dangerous, was living there or had been living there recently. The whole experience still unsettles me. My wife and I were camping in Mississippi, in a remote campground with barely anyone else around. We spent most of the day in solitude, enjoying the quiet trails. The only person we saw was a guy in the afternoon, driving a large white van with tinted windows. He passed by twice, slowly looping around the campsite while my wife was changing in the bathroom. It felt a little strange, but we didn't think much of it at first. After a while, he parked and got out. He seemed to be inspecting the bathroom area. His behavior was a bit awkward, but nothing overtly alarming. He didn't say much, which was odd since we were the only ones around, but we shrugged it off and went about our day. Later that night, after it got dark, we were lying in the tent, settling in for the night. That's when my wife spoke up. "You remember that guy from earlier?" "I don't know. I felt like he gave me this weird smile, but I didn't want to freak you out." "Probably nothing." I hesitated. Actually, I thought he was a little off, too, but I didn't want to say anything and make you worry. Right after that, I heard a branch snap just outside the tent. My heart skipped a beat, and my brain instantly went into overdrive, making escape plans while trying to stay calm and not panic. Finally, I turned to her, my voice a little shaky. "Hey, do you want to just throw everything in the car and leave? Like right now?" She looked at me with wide eyes, nodding without hesitation. We both silently checked around the campsite, eyes darting toward the car. The area was completely dark and eerily quiet. We quickly unzipped the tent, gathered all our gear, and stuffed everything into the back of the car as fast as we could. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. We got in the car and drove off as fast as we could, not looking back until we were miles down the road. We didn't speak much during the drive, just a shared sense of relief that we were out of there. Whatever that guy was up to, we didn't want to find out. I was hiking in New Jersey when I came across a homeless man drinking a six-pack. I must have stared a little too long, because he struck up a conversation. After some small talk, he started sharing his background. He said he used to work for a newspaper, but had since drifted into odd jobs and living off the grid. He mentioned that he'd been arrested a few times for vagrancy and added, almost matter-of-factly, that the Allentown, Pennsylvania jail had the best accommodations in the area. I had a similar experience on a back road leading to my family's ranch property, which has been passed down from my great-grandparents. There's an old farmhouse there that no one lives in full-time anymore, though family members still use it occasionally. To get there, you drive through the woods for about 15 minutes from the highway. Beyond that, a few scattered ranches line a winding road for another 30 minutes before it reconnects with the highway. It's pretty remote. Anyone walking that road would be out there for hours. The spot is perfect for stargazing, with no other lights around except for the rare car passing through. One night, my friend and I decided to drive up to the ranch to hang out and try to capture a time-lapse of the stars. When we got to the driveway, we got out to search for the hidden gate key. That's when this guy just appeared, walking down the road. He had serious drifter vibes, unkempt beard, all in white, but he wasn't carrying a bag or backpack or anything. Just strolling along this back road, miles from anything but us and the cows. We made eye contact and said hello, but he didn't respond and kept walking. Flustered trying to find the key and more than a little spooked by this random stranger, we ditched our stargazing plans and headed back to town. Even though it's still rural enough to see the stars, it at least didn't feel like we were about to star in a drifter horror movie. My husband and I were hiking to a downed World War II plane in British Columbia. It's in a national park, but there's no official trail. To find the trailhead, you count telephone poles and look for a crude drawing of a plane someone has left nearby. When we finally reached the crash site, we noticed two guys who looked completely strung out. My husband and I had split up to explore different parts of the bush around the plane, so they first saw just me. The way they said hello as they walked toward me made my stomach drop. They had knives hooked to their belts, not unusual for the bush, but something about them felt very wrong. As soon as they spotted my husband, who's a big, muscular guy, they immediately backed off. I shudder to think what might have happened if I'd been alone. I was working at a summer camp this past summer, and all the staff stayed in cabins. Around 1 a.m., I was finishing up some last-minute paperwork in my cabin when I started hearing scratching at the door. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was probably nothing, but after about 10 minutes, my patience ran out. I thought, I don't care if it's a bear or a wendigo. I'm confronting this thing. I threw open the door and aimed my flashlight at the source of the noise, and there it was, a porcupine, happily gnawing on my door. When I was younger, I used to ride my bike up from North Jersey on weekends to camp alone. I had a favorite spot, a ledge overlooking the lake, where I'd pitch my tent and just enjoy the solitude. One night, during a heavy downpour, I started hearing thuds outside my tent, like a large animal was moving around. I didn't dare unzip or move. I just stayed frozen, hoping it would pass. Eventually, the noises stopped, and I fell asleep, tense and afraid. The next morning, I woke up to find several sizable boulders scattered around my tent, rocks that hadn't been there before. That was the last time I ever camped at that spot.